artist as he plunges headlong into crisis after crisis, even as his imagination and creativity soar. I'm reading from the blurb of this wonderful book, Betrayed by Hope, which, ever since its coming into the world, has had a life as extraordinary as that of the protagonist that it seeks to explore. Betrayed by Hope, that was published by HarperCollins in late December 2020, encountered its first audience through distanced performance on the digital stage and has, in the 1 year of its life so far, been incarnated into an audiobook. I hope my slides are visible. Can I have a feedback?
Yes, they are visible.
Yes. So this is the play. It has traveled wonderfully, received a lot of critical coverage, been reviewed in the Hindustan Times, in the Hindu, and many, many other platforms. And this is, I hope, interest to you.
See, Michael Madhusudan is one of the enigmatic people of Bengali literature, of Bengali culture. And he's been a very fascinating person, but underexplored and under-celebrated.
In Calcutta, my loving father had married again. Am I then the sum of all the loved ones that I have failed? No, I am Michael Madhusudan Dutt, a poet.
Betrayed by Hope. It's the book that I have had the privilege to do a voice version of. It's written by Namita Gokhale and Malashri Lal, and it's about Michael Madhusudan Dutt.
That was Betrayed by Hope for you. So thank you so much for watching that. So Malashri, my first question to you is that Betrayed by Hope, a play on the life of Michael Madhusudan Dutt that you and Namita Gokhale ma'am authored together, and which also won the Kalinga Literature Festival Award 2021 for the best book in the fiction category, is a book that follows two earlier books that you and Namita ma'am have co-edited, both being, I believe, anthologies of feminist scholarship. One is In Search of Sita, Revisiting Mythology, which was published by Penguin in 2009. And the other, Finding Radha, The Quest for Love, also a Penguin production in 2018. I'm deeply intrigued to know that both of you, being feminist writers and scholars, what was it that actually drew you to the life of Michael Madhusudan Dutt? And what compelled the specific choice of the dramatic form for such retelling? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Basudhara, for being in conversation with me, and my thanks to Mohar for inviting me for this particular program and giving Namita Gokhale and myself a chance to focus on our recent book on Michael Madhusudan Dutt. Namita is unfortunately not able to join us online, but I had long discussions with her in preparation for today's hour-long session. And so I will be presenting her views, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly too. So to pick up the question that Basudhara, you've asked me, of course, Betrayed by Hope is a play about a rather extraordinary poetic genius, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, who was born in 1824, died in 1872, and is best known for his epic poem Meghnad Baut Kabbo. He was a romantic poet of a sort of extraordinary talent, and he changed the direction of 19th century Bengali literature, particularly poetry, by transposing the epic from the English European context to the Bengali language, and also putting in for the first time the sonnet form into the Bengali language. There are many more firsts that he can be credited with, but some of that may emerge in our conversation. So Namita and I decided to write his life not as a straight biography, but interrogating his biography. I think that's where the innovation happened for us. And although the person was a man of literary excellence, he was a rather troublesome character if you look at Michael Madhusudan Dutt from the feminist perspective. So we wanted to bring in that dialogue, that controversy, that paradox, those challenges, and to play off the life of Madhusudan Dutt along with his literary output and see the contradictions that happened in the drama of his life. So we introduced a feminist interlocutor. And that feminist interlocutor, who's a Bangladeshi young PhD scholars, like many of you might be in the audience as PhD scholars, you know, one almost begins to live the life of the person that you're researching about. You know, you dream about that character, you converse with that character, you get bothered by everything that that character does. So we wanted to bring in that drama that happens between a research scholar and a PhD subject. And because the women in the life of Michael Madhusudan Dutt were very shadowy characters, you know, his wife and then his life partner, Rebecca, and then Henrietta, they were rather shadowy figures, or at least we don't know much about them. We had to bring in this drama of feminist scholarship into the structure of the play and slightly from the outside through this character of Rubina Rehman. Now, the backstory of how this book happened is also quite interesting, if I can take a few minutes. For Namita, it started fairly early. Back in 2004, she had written reviews of Ghulam Murshid's two very well-known books. One was the biography of Michael Madhusudan Dutt, which is called The Heart of a Rebel Poet. The Heart of the Rebel Poet is the collection of letters, and the biography is called Lured by Hope. And that was a Bengali biography which was translated into English. So Namita wrote reviews of both these books, and as she has said in many of the interviews, that she felt deeply connected with the trajectory of Michael Madhusudan Dutt's life. The rebel in him, the person who constantly challenged the circumstances in which he was. She felt very compelled to take him up as a kind of a subject, but she is not of Bengali extraction in any way, so was in a way hesitating to do this full time. But nevertheless, when she read the collection of letters, she said it fell into place like 5 acts of a play. And there the idea germinated. Many years later, and this was as late as 2011, it fell upon me to do a detailed book review of William Redichi's translation of Meghnad Bodh Kavya, which he called the slaughter of Meghnad, something of that nature. But it was a very beautiful translation, but in Redichi's characteristical manner, it was deeply sensitive to Dutt's poetry and also picked up the lyrical stance of the poet. When I got to write a detailed review of this translation, it occurred to me that the stamina of Michael Madhusudan Dutt's poetry was much greater than just Meghnad Bodh Kavya. And I mentioned this to Namita at one point, and she brought out the letters and said, take a look at what I have thought about, and let's discuss this, whether we can do it as a collaborative project. Now, I'm a Bengali, yes, but a Provashi Bengali. So I also hesitate to deal with completely Bengali material. But in this case, our task was made much easier because the letters were in English and they talked about material that was in Bengali. And then we decided to create this into the book that has emerged as Betrayed by Hope, a play on the life of Michael Madhusudan Dutt. And we have said that while the letters are real, The fiction part of it is in the creation of the interlocutor. So back to you, Vasudhara.
Thank you. That was such an interesting story, to know how a book sprung up, how it grew, and how finally it made its way into the hands of readers like us. Thank you. And you very interestingly pointed out something that stands out in the book for me, your Sutradhar, your narrator, Rubina Rahman, who you said, is responsible for bringing that feminist angle into the play. So, Rubina Rahman, the Sutradhar of your play, is a young millennial female academic from Bangladesh. So, and she is struggling, as you point out in the stage instructions. It's pointed out that she is somewhat out of her depth in handling the interplay of the poet's life in undivided Bengal, with the divided legacy after partition and the birth of East Pakistan in 1955 and the subsequent creation of Bangladesh in 1971. So this fragmented sense of identity, how far was it a deliberate choice, and how far do you think it reflects Madhusudan Dutt's own fragmented identity?
This is indeed a very crucial decision that we had to take. And again, to reveal the creative process, which I'm sure everybody is curious about always when one talks about a book, the creative process is never easy. And in this case, Rubina Rahman almost walked into the play on her own. And I'll tell you how that happened. Right from the beginning of our conceptualizing the book, we were very sure that we wanted this dialogue between Michael Madhusudan Dutt and a Sutradhar. But we didn't know who the Sutradhar would be. It had to be somebody who was delving into the post-colonial sensibility of a modern-day reader, looking back upon Michael Madhusudan Dutt. We also wanted the gender question to be prioritized. We wanted the postmodern aspect also to be there, the transnational, the transcultural, the multilingual. These were the aspects of Michael Madhusudan Dutt that we wanted to be pulled out from that biographical context and brought to the stage for discussion. So we tried to find the right kind of a Sutradhar over endless attempts. We played around with the possibility of a man or a woman in Michael Madhusudan Dutt's own time. We tried to do the same with in a sort of postmodernistic way, with putting a man or a woman Sutradhar in our own time. We tried the possibility of a neutral Sutradhar who could be played around by the director of the theatre production and could malleable kind of a character who could be adapted to the audience that that director might have. But none of it worked. We wrote reams about each one of them. We wrote dialogues, but somehow the structure was not falling into place. And then, as you mentioned, Vasudhara, the play was published end of 2020. It had taken 9 years of making because we were so disappointed that we were not getting the right kind of Sutradhar. And then one day in the month of March or so, when COVID had hit, Namita and I could not meet to have our discussions. We were on the telephone, and suddenly it seemed that Rubina Rahman emerged from that conversation. And we said, oh, split identity, feminist approach, cultural context, multilingualism, postmodern, postcolonial. Here is the girl who's going to do this. And even the name emerged in that conversation. So as I said, she sort of walked into our lives and into that play. And suddenly the manuscript seemed to fall into place quite pleasingly, at least we thought. And the divided legacy of colonialism and the split identity of a feminist scholar who both sympathizes with Michael Madhusudan Dutt and is also repelled by many of the things that he does. This kind of a multiple split is what we wanted to put into the story, and I hope we succeeded.
Exactly, and it is brilliant, the way that Rubina kind of uncovers Michael Madhusudan Dutt's life. Because if you look at it, Michael Madhusudan Dutt is known by what he wrote, but how far is his life actually known? Not even within Bengal, I believe that aspects of his life would be, familiar enough. So, if you could, Malashri, I have a few pictures that are from your archives, and I would like to show them. And maybe you could talk about Michael Madhusudan Dutt's life from the perspective that you see it as a playwright.
Sure. So this is the home, as you see, of Michael Madhusudan Dutt in Shagordori, which is now in Bangladesh. Michael Madhusudan Dutt is pretty well known in Bangladesh, and annually there are visitors, there are certain celebrations that happen in this home. So he was born 25th of January 1824, and of course in undivided India. So there was a lot of transition between various parts of Bengal at that time. The border separation really happened much later, and the Rubina character brings in this history of the creation of Bangladesh and the many identity changes that the country went through. Let's go to the next one.
Yes. Is it visible?
No.
The Hindu college slide?
No, we're not seeing that.
Is it visible now? No?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, now we have got it. So, Michael Madhusudan Dutt went to Hindu college as a student, and of course, at that time, the English literature curriculum was strongly British, and that is where he had a very sound grounding in the legacy and history of British literature. As you see the caption here from our book, that Hindu college has shaped many personalities. And of course, it was a very Eurocentric curriculum. And some of the internal conflict within Michael Madhusudan Dutt arises from this. So while he was a student at Hindu college, he was deeply attracted to Britain, both as a country, as a literary place, as in terms of its vision, its ideology, and he wanted to be like the British. And at one time, and you probably know the story, in 1847, he converted to Christianity. Now, why he converted is also a bit of a mystery. It could have been the split identity of being a person of Hindu heritage at home, but being very drawn towards the British Christian heritage through his studies. But there's also a possibility that the parents had arranged for a marriage for Michael Madhusudan Dutt. The letters reveal this, and he wanted to escape this kind of an arranged marriage with a Hindu girl and all that it entailed. And he secretly went and converted to Christianity. It seems his father knew about it but could not access him. He hid this from most of his friends, went into almost a hiding. Chaplain came and converted him, and there he was, having adopted the name of Michael before his given name of Madhusudan Dutt. So the Hindu college had to actually de-enroll him because it was not permissible to have a Christian student. So Michael then had to be enrolled in Bishop College, which was a good institution, but certainly not of the caliber of Hindu College. So we can move to the next slide.
This is from Madras.
So this is from Madras. So Madras happens after Hindu College. He joins Bishop College. His father, who's very, very upset that his only son has converted to Christianity, supports his education at Bishop College for a little while, but then stops paying his tuition fees. Michael has no income of his own, And also ideologically, he hoped to gain by his conversion because he wanted to go to England to study. He wanted to be known as an English writer. So he decided then to leave Calcutta and go to Madras. In Madras, he got a rather ordinary, low-paying job in what was called the Boys' Asylum, which was like a school. And he managed a very, very modest living, and then fell in love and married a half English girl by the name of Rebecca Thompson. Shall we go to the next slide?
Sure.
Yes.
Yes. So this is from England.
This is now England. So while he was married to Rebecca Thompson and in Madras, he wrote his first long poem in English, which was called The Captive Lady. And he sent it all over the place, hoping that it will be reviewed and well accepted by readers of English. Unfortunately, it did not get the kind of appreciation that Michael Madhusudan Dutt had hoped for. And in fact, it got some very critical reviews out of influential journals, particularly out of Calcutta. So he was deeply disappointed, and he felt that he just had to go to England. That was the place where he would find his footing, he believed. And so we quoted this in our book from his letters to say how I longed to be in England. The country had come to love through its literary masters. Milton and Byron spoke in my dreams, and I wanted to follow the paths they had traversed. So let's move to the next slide.
Sure.
So that's a long gap actually that we are covering from the last slide to this one. He goes to France much later, but what happens in the interim is that he just leaves his wife and his children in Madras and goes away to Calcutta, because in between his father has died in 1855 and he lost both his parents at about the same time. So when he goes to Calcutta, lured by many of his so-called well-wishers that he's the only child, and even if he was in a way disinherited by the father, he actually was legatee to a great deal of property and wealth. But when he got to Calcutta, he realized there were many, many complications. Meanwhile, there is this half French companion, the person that we know as Henrietta White, with whom he has a companionship all the way from 1858. And then with Henrietta, he goes to England to study to becoming a barrister. And then Henrietta is not able to manage being in Calcutta on her own, and she joins him in London. They both find it economically very difficult to exist in England, so he moves to France. Now, since we are with the particular group that is with Mohar, and I see many students from the French department here, I want to focus a little bit as to what France meant to Michael Madhusudan Dutt. If you see the notation from our book, again from his letter, I have been for months like a ship becalmed in France, though, thank God, I have had the strength of mind and resolution to make the very best use of my misfortune in learning the three great continental languages, that is Italian, German, and French, which were well worth knowing for their literary wealth. So first and foremost, the literary wealth of France attracted him. Secondly, he enjoyed the quality of life that France offered him, although his wealth quotient was very, very low. He found the people friendly. He found the educational system extremely attractive. In fact, there are letters where he's speaking high praise of how he wants his children to be educated in France, and tells his dear friend Gaur Boshak, who's sitting in Calcutta, to please send his children to France because this is the best education that you can have. At one point, he and Henrietta are expecting their third child, and they can ill afford it. He's deeply in debt, and he writes a desperate letter to his friends in Calcutta, including Vidya Shagor. and says, please send me some money, otherwise I will be put into prison, into debtor's prison, because I'm not in a position that I can pay my debts. And who helps him out? A completely unknown French woman comes to his rescue, pays his debts simply because she admires his writing. So that is the kind of compassionate society that Michael Madhusudan appreciated in France, and of course the multilingual heritage that was easily available to him while he and Henrietta lived in Versailles for some time. Shall we move to the next slide?
Yes. So this is the last slide from Mimti's life.
So that is actually his gravestone. And the latter part of his life can be summarized very briefly. He left Henrietta in Versailles, like he had left Rebecca in Madras, went off to London. Vidyasagar was able to send him quantities of money that sort of freed him of his debt, was enabling him to pay his fees at the university, so he became a barrister. And then he went to Kolkata. Of course, Henrietta was not able to manage on her own, so she also joined him in Kolkata. The last few years, he tried to make a living as a barrister, failed miserably. He did small jobs in the law courts because his heart all through his life was in writing, though he continued to attempt other things. But by then, he was a very well-known writer. So there were a lot of well-wishers who bailed him out of his debt. He had also become alcoholic. Henrietta had become alcoholic too. And therefore, the last few years were utterly, utterly sad. And he wrote his own epitaph. Michael Madhusudan Dutt, the great poet, died in the General Hospital of Calcutta, almost like a very, very ordinary, penury-stricken patient. And Henrietta died 3 days before he did. And the irony of it is that he had become a Christian convert, but the local church refused to bury him in the Christian cemetery for 2 days. And Henrietta was buried, but his body was not allowed to be buried till about 1,000 of his readers and well-wishers pressurized the local church to allow the burial of Michael Madhusudan Dutt in the Lower Circular Road Cemetery. And the epitaph that he wrote for himself is what was etched on the tombstone, but many years after he died. So that, in a nutshell, is both his life, his struggles, and his literary influence that he derived from France, Italy, and German. And in India, he derived his literary influence majorly from Sanskrit.
Thank you. So that brings us quite up to date with facts that are there in the book, and which I hope that students here will read for themselves if they manage to get a copy of the book. So coming back, since we just had a glimpse of Michael Madhusudan Dutt's travels, the landscape that he traversed, the linguistic and the cultural geography that he traversed, I feel that this very post-colonial and post-national spirit of the play depends very significantly on the character of your Sutradhar. I'm coming back to her again. So Rubina Rahman, as you said, who appeared after 9 years, and I find that 9 very significant in feminist terms. So it's 9 months and 9 years, So that gestation, Rubina Rahman's gestation was for 9 years before she emerged. And she is in dialogue, she is a conflicted character herself, and she's in dialogue with another very conflicted, person. And as you very rightly point out, that researchers, they live the lives of the people that they're trying to learn and write about. So if we were to change the Sutradhar, say the Sutradhar, would not be Rubina Rahman, do you believe that the spirit of the play as it stands now would be radically altered?
The spirit of the play would be significantly altered. And to pick up the thread that you rightly pointed out, the conflicted character of Rubina Rahman, let me read out 2 very short extracts. The end of Act 2 has the Sutradhar saying very bluntly, Dutt arrived in Calcutta by the Bentic during the early hours of Saturday, 2nd February 1856, and lived there for the following 6.5 years without ever returning to his family in Madras. So this is the earlier part of the play. Now Rubina is speaking in her own character. I have even considered abandoning my research on this insufferable man, brilliant though he was. Ruby, you've ended up giving your time and passion to a subject unworthy of the intellectual attention of any thinking woman. So that's Rubina's conflict. Now we move to Act 3 and it opens in the following words from Rubina. The backdrop has images of the theatre district in Kolkata, and the Sutradhar steps onto the stage. Sutradhar takes a deep breath. Rubina Rahman, get a grip on yourself. Don't get so upset. Michael Madhusudan Dutt is your research subject, not your boyfriend. Infuriating as he is, I need to re-establish some distance here. She composes herself and moves into the spotlight, takes on her serious tone. The great romantic had returned to the city of his youth, imbued with great expectations about his inheritance. Remember, he was a creature of hope. Dutt had expected that his relatives who conspired to seize the estate would withdraw their claims as soon as they saw him and would allow him to take sole possession. On inquiry, he realized that his father had left a lot more property than he had originally anticipated. So this is the kind of dialogue, Basudhara and Mohar and my dear audience, that happens throughout the play. And Rubina is conflicted because, as I've given you the gist of the life of Michael Madhusudan Dutt, to what extent, it's a question we've all asked, to what extent do you research a male colonial writer from a post-colonial perspective? What do you think about him? And if that person's life situation is anti-feminist, then how do you as a feminist scholar interrogate him? So if this person were to be changed, it would make a huge difference. And as I said, we played around with the possibility of a neutral, malleable Sutradhar, and it didn't work because then the whole play would have to be rewritten. But tell me, Basudhara, you yourself have written a very deep and thoughtful review of Betrayed by Hope, and this was published in Confluence South Asian Perspectives, a very well-known journal out of UK. What drew you to the book?
Well, it was precisely Rubina Rahman, and the approach that as playwrights, you and Namita ma'am had of bringing this idea, this subtext of academic pedagogy. So this critical pedagogy that is applied to Michael Madhusudan Dutt's life is also equally applicable to an age that all of us are, I believe, as scholars, deeply engaged in. We cannot study the history of Indian writing in English, without negotiating with that colonial legacy that we have. And the kind of, I loved this idea of, introducing this critical pedagogy into, something which is very creative. So there is a continuous, I would say, conversation in your text between the creative and the critical, between what is and what could be, and also between the various temporal zones. So Rubina, she is looking at things from her perspective today. She is repeatedly emphasizing, her current identity, her current location. That location is also very emphasized in the stage directions that you have offered there. So very elaborate stage directions that give the play a topographical standing, and the way that it interacts with history. I loved this. It was very fluid and not at all inhibiting. It allowed free entry and exit, into the writer's psyche through letters, and also to Rubina's psyche. So I think it was Rubina who stood out for me, and the entire method by which this play had, emerged. I loved that very much.
Well, thank you for the appreciation. And since you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation about the digital production, it's fascinating that we wrote the play for the stage, then the pandemic happened. It hasn't yet gone on the stage in a real sense, physical sense, but it has had a very good digital production, which I hope you'll be able to show us some snippets. Interestingly, when the India International Centre Delhi commissioned the production, the role of Michael Madhusudan Dutt was played by a Probashi Bengali actor in Delhi, Arun Das. And he found an excellent diaspora Bangladeshi in Vancouver to play Rubina Rehman. And this person is Inji Zeba Zahir. And they make a perfect blend because in many ways they're playing themselves. So along with the split multiple history of Bangladesh in the case of Rubina and the displaced Bengali diaspora that you get in a Probashi, the post-colonial situation gets more and more fascinating and complex. And that enters the dramatic performance of both these actors. It's also a very easy play to do digitally if any student groups in our audience today is interested, because there are only two characters, a male and a female. And most of the time, Michael Madhusudan Dutt is just sitting there, pacing around with a sheaf of papers in his hand, which happen to be his letters, and he's occasionally reading. And crucially, he has a glass of cognac in his hand. Well, that also comes from France, okay? So that is the inspiration for him to carry on reading bits and pieces from his letter, which Rubina is interacting with. So Michael's story becomes dovetailed with the modern narrative of multiple shifts that you were talking about, Basudhara.
I incidentally have a couple of videos that I would love to share with the audience on this note, because you just spoke about, these digital productions of the play. And I have two clippings. I believe I'll begin with one from the India International Centre that I would love to share with the audience. So just give me a minute.
নিজাগারে সবই আমি অবহেলা অর্থ লোভে দেশে দেশে করিল ভ্রমণ বন্দরে বন্দরে যথা বাণিজ্যের তরি বন্দরে বন্দরে যথা বাণিজ্য নিজাগারে ছিল অমূল্য রতন নগণ্য তা সবে আমি অবহেলা করি।
Those were the words of the great 19th century Bengali poet Michael Madhusudan Dutt, or more accurately, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, the father of modern Bengali literature. A rare treasure is described by none other than the great Rabindranath Tagore.
You know our demigod, Tagore, the Nobel laureate and polymath extraordinaire who came to personify the glorious culmination of the Bengal Renaissance.
But you may not know that before the great Rabindranath captured our imagination, we had another magnificent poet and playwright, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, born 1824, a visionary and a provocateur, the single greatest force to propel Bengali literature into the modern era. And he knew it too.
I shall come out like a tremendous comet.
He wrote that prophecy to his friend Rajnarayan Basu in 1861. His dazzling life and legacy live on only in fragmented memory. He was fascinated by British literature and European traditions, but at the end of his life, he returned to his mother tongue, to his beloved birthplace. Before his final return from Europe to the motherland, he penned the sonnet Bahudukho, commemorating a small river that flows past Shagorbai, the East Bengal village of his birth.
Kapotukho, always a river, am I reminded of you. In the solitude, I think only of you. As in their dreams, people hear magical sounds, so your soothing murmur charms my ears in confusion profound. In many a country have I seen many a river, but this thirst for affection.
So that was a brief clipping from the wonderfully performed version of Betrayed by Hope at the India International Center. It's available on YouTube for those who want to have a look at the entire play. And let me tell you, you will be absolutely mesmerized. You won't stir for the next 45 minutes because it's divided into 2 episodes. I showed you a glimpse from episode 1. I'll also try to show you a glimpse from episode 2. Coming back, Malashri, in this video that we just saw, you have, as you pointed out, someone from Delhi, someone from Bangladesh who is now residing in Canada, and the two come together. So language, culture, geography are repeatedly resurfacing in the Bildungsroman of Michael Madhusudan Dutt's life. And I believe that they have been very, very aptly captured in the digital medium through which the book first, met its audiences. So, would you say that all these things which coalesced in Madhusudan Dutt's life, that shaped his transnational sensibility, also were responsible for his very tragic destiny and for his historical eclipse?
See, we want the play to be relevant in current times. So the matter of identity, belonging, loss, these are key markers in our present situation for everybody. Because Michael Madhusudan Dutt was transnational in a certain way, and I would say even before his time. He was a cosmopolitan before it became a fashionable term and was generally accepted and given high value. In some ways, he was punished for being so multicultural and so transnational because he was adept at many languages. He transited between them. Culturally, he moved between Bengal, England, France, and in his imagination, he moved much further into many other languages and cultures. And somehow people assessed him as being maverick and not quite settling into any kind of a deep, continuous cultural affiliation because that was the norm in his time. But remember, his legacy also in Hindu college and in Bengal was the legacy of the reform movement in Bengal. So the British influence was very strong, and there were many other people who had divided legacies who dealt with it in their own ways. Rabindranath Tagore, Bankim Chandra, Vidyasagar himself. So what did Michael Madhusudan Dutt do with it is what was our concern. But we don't want to leave him in his time. We want him to function for us. And therefore the questions that you ask about language, culture, and geography, we want to bring it into our times to show that there are great writers even today, full of idealism, who move easily from one culture to another, but that is accepted. In his time, it was not so accepted and often led to a kind of a personal tragedy. But nevertheless, multiculturalism, transnationalism is not an easy position even now. One can look around and the two writers I admire greatly, Pico Iyer, who lives in Japan now and has books that dwell into different cultures at different times. Namita Ghosh, who also transits between New York and Goa and Bengal, and other very transnational writers. But today we are curious about their transnational identity. In Michael Madhusudan Dutt's time, people were a little confused, a little surprised, and not quite able to give him the kind of recognition that he deserved. And not only that, he went into all kinds of subtext. He was interested in history, in mythology, different sources, and what we get as an output is an enormous corpus of which very little is actually known. So people know Kaputak Khunod that Arun Das just read out. People know Michael Madhusudan Dutt's Meghnad Baut Kabbo. They probably know Atto Bilap, which is part of the source for our title. But how much more do people know of Michael Madhusudan Dutt? Even in Bengal and outside Bengal, totally dependent on translations if they're available.
You mentioned that is that a sonnet, Atmubila? You just mentioned that work, and you point out how your title derives from that. I also noticed that, and you also pointed out that "Betrayed by Hope" also bases itself on the title of "Lured by Hope," which is one of that's very well-known biographies by Ghulam Murshid, and it was translated from Bengali to English by Gopa Majumdar in 2003. So the idea of hope that you take up from the title of this biography, is hope a very conscious subtext, colonial subtext that is operating in the play's title?
Yes, that's another very significant question that you ask. As everyone knows, it's very hard to find the right title for a book, or for that matter, a research paper. And likewise, Namita and I did the manuscript, and then we struggled and struggled to find the right title. We finally decided to locate the title from the echoes of his very well-known Bangla poem, Atto Bila. And yes, there's Ghulam Murshid's biography, which is Lured by Hope. But the origin for all of this is the line from Atto Bila, which is Ashar Cholone Bhuli. Now, we all know that translation is a tough, challenging task. And the word cholone can be translated in many ways. And I'm here with a group of people who are studying French. So I'm sure you're dealing with this problem of translation and accuracy. And there is no accuracy that one can ever have. One can only have approximations. So then we decided that we would build the title on the idea of translating it as Betrayed by Hope, Ashar Cholone Bhuli. Now, hope is a very key word in the life and aspirations of Michael Madhusudan Dutt. He had lots of problems in his life, as you have seen from our presentation so far, but he never lost hope. Even in the last years and the last days of his life, he was writing based on Homer's Iliad. He was writing an idyll based on the idea of pastoral verses. He never gave up. And that's the brilliant, tragic hero in him. Even Meghnad is an anti-hero. Meghnad comes out of Michael's idea of the legacy of Milton's Satan. And that is why he wanted to create his greatest epic around Meghnad. But he was also a feminist in his way, because he dwelt on the personality of Meghnad's wife, Promila, who's not much talked about in the narrative. So what do you do with a man like him? I still feel sometimes confused about my response to Michael Madhusudan Dutt, who creates Promila, but who abandons his own wife.
Exactly. And I would like at this point to show the promised 2.5 minutes from the other version, from the other episode of the play that we just witnessed, where it talks about Michael Madhusudan Dutt being a creature of hope. So here is sharing this with the audience. No. बोलो क्या बोलो
Home at last. After a month in SICI, Madhusudan arrived in Calcutta on 2nd February 1856. The great romantic had returned to the city of his youth, expecting to inherit a vast estate. Remember, he was a creature of hope, and indeed had believed that his relatives who conspired to seize the estates would withdraw their claim as soon as they saw him, and he would take sole possession of all property. What he found instead were litigious relations with a stranglehold on the legal system.
On inquiry, he realized that his father had left a lot more property than he had originally anticipated.
And he expected to be feted by the literati of Calcutta as the new Gobi, the new poet. After all, the city was abuzz with cultural activities. The creative frenzy saw some of the great works in Bangla literature come to life. Even the local theatres showed a vigorous interest in Shakespeare and adapted his plays for the Bangla audience.
Bhanumati Vilash, an adaptation of The Merchant of Venice, and Bhanti Vilash, an adaptation of The Comedy of Errors, were particularly popular.
But the literary community was quite indebted to Michael's imaginings. And for the first 2.5 years in Calcutta, it seems he did not have much to look out for as he had enjoyed in Madras. But then Dutt chanced upon an unexpected opportunity. The princely Singha brothers commissioned playwright Ram Narayan Tarakratna to write a Bangla play based on the Sanskrit word Ratna. This play was performed on the stage in July 1858. And since English guests at the performance included the Governor General of Bengal, they wished to have a play.
So that was from the second episode of the fabulously performed play at the India International Centre. Coming back to you, Malashri, when I try to have a look at all the 3 books that you and Namita ma'am have worked together on, that is In Search of Sita, Finding Radha, and then this Betrayed by Hope, I find that all 3 are characterized by a consistent genre bending, a very complex interweaving of criticism and creativity, a very well-planned and well-executed montage effect, and a chronological presentation of biographical facts, and this, building up of the whole to fragments, and the whole ends up being greater than the fragments. So, would you call this, a feminist mode of narration that you bring from, Sita onwards to apply to Michael Madhusudan Dutt?
It's interesting, Basudhara, that you should consider this kind of a montage and fragmented writing method for the structure of our 3 books as a feminist approach. Just fragmentation of the narrative itself is not feminist always, because we have absurd theatre which goes back and forth and other forms of writing. But yes, there is one commonality. We are interested in foregrounding the woman's perspective in all the work that Namita Gokhale and I have done together. The first 2 books on Sita and Radha were edited anthologies. So it had our voice, but also the multiple perspectives of other essayists, story writers, and poets, filmmakers, visual artists, etc. That was particularly so with the Sita book. When we got the response from it, we went on to do Radha, where we introduced another very interesting perspective on Radha, which was a section called the Songs of Radha, where the earliest songs, and this is the research part of it, goes back actually to the 7th century, and it was a woman Sanskrit writer. And all the way to Hindi writers such as Dharamveer Bharti in our contemporary times. So the perspectives on Radha are not only chronological, but also they interweave with what you said earlier, the multicultural and the geographical cultural intersections. Now, with Michael Madhusudan Dutt, this is a co-authored book. So the nature of the montage is rather different. And we had to interject a certain kind of creative dialogue in order to bring in the multiple perspectives. Whether you want to call it feminist or not, I don't know. I would be okay with that label. I don't know about Namita whether she wants that label or not.
That is wonderful. Yes. So we will keep some space for reader response, and I will retain the idea that there is a feminist mode of narration behind all the three books. Also, since you just pointed out, you just spoke about Michael Madhusudan Dutt's depiction of his mythological women characters, and there's also this, just a small section from your book, Act Three, where the Sutradhar says that in the depths of his heart, did Madhusudan feel guilt towards the wife he had abandoned in Madras, along with the 4 children he had fathered? Was he turning his guilt into dramatic art by focusing on heroines, bold and accomplished, in his shorter plays and poems? So there is a process of linking Madhusudan Dutt's life and art together. What would be your comment on Madhusudan's? Because this is a subject which is very close to your heart. Women and mythology is a subject that has always deeply interested you. So, as someone who specializes in this, what is your opinion of the way that Michael Madhusudan Dutt was challenging stereotypical representations of Indian womanhood in his plays?
You're right. Namita and I are both deeply interested in revisiting mythology, and there is a good reason for it. In India, I think we are very fortunate that we are surrounded by a living mythology. Every other day there is a festival, there's an observance, and all of it is based on storytelling. We all know about the multiple Ramayans and the many versions of the Mahabharata, but every little story in all parts of the country has a version that keeps changing each time it is narrated. So we want to pick up this idea of the living mythology and bring it into the book pattern so that more and more voices can be captured and generate further voices. So that is the idea. To some extent, Michael Madhusudan Dutt was also doing something similar because he wrote a large number of dramatic poems which were women-centered. Not much research work has actually been done about them. But his important stage play in Bangla, and he also had an English version to it, Shormishtha. Then he has a series which is called Brajangana, which has Radha and that cluster of stories that he is exploring. Then he has another series which is called Birangona Kabbo, the valiant women. Then he has Rajasthan history, which is Krishna Kumari. So time and again, he's exploring history and legend, mythology and folklore and bringing it into the dramatic poetic form. And blank verse, that is his huge contribution to the evolution of the Bengali literary genres. He's experimenting with the blank form and showing its wide scope and possibility. So you get the old mythology told anew, and you get a European model of the blank verse brought into the Bengali language. So look at the number of intersections, matrices that he is actually creating successfully.
That is brilliant, and I hope that people here who would be interested in research on Michael Madhusudan Dutt will have some valuable takeaways from this. And finally, I come to my last question, since we are near the 1 hour time that was allotted to us. All of us as readers, and as you were pointing out regarding the translation of the work that you had been reviewing, it's widely agreed critically that Michael Madhusudan Dutt has not been well served by the English translators of his Bengali writing. However, I feel that by creatively translating his life into English in Betrayed by Hope, you and Namita ma'am have given Indian writing in English a brilliant hero, a native Prometheus. Could this be an instance of the empire writing back, of the post-colonies' reclamation and celebration of that cosmopolitanism which had condemned Michael Madhusudan Dutt in his lifetime?
It's a very good word when you talk about not only the empire writing back, but also the post-colonies reclamation. Michael Madhusudan Dutt certainly belongs to this kind of reclamation and a rereading of his oeuvre. And translation is a very difficult task, particularly his Bangla is archaic and tough to bring into modern English. And poetry is one of the most difficult things to translate, as we all know. So we don't know how fortunate he might be with future translators, and only a limited number of translations exist. So we thought our play would use the original English of Michael Madhusudan Dutt in his letters, which talks about the poetic arts and his life together, and take him out of the Bengali readership to a national and a global audience. And this is where we've been very fortunate in having the audiobook read out by Victor Banerjee. We've been fortunate in this digital production that you just gave us clips of. And may I share with the audience that there is talk of production in Bangladesh on stage. So that's a way in which the reclamation of Michael Madhusudan Dutt will happen, and in a way Rubina Rahman will go back home. And there is also a Hindi translation of our play, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, which is in the discussion stage. So with all these methods, we hope that Michael Madhusudan Dutt will become visible and more known for the range and scope. He is well known for Meghnad Baut Kabo, but the range and scope of his work and the numerous intersections of scholarly, academic, intellectual positions that he took, this certainly is a subject for research within universities and for scholarly work in circles which are interested in literary output such as festivals, etc. And on stage, it is visible, I hope, through a book such as ours.
Thank you. Thank you. That brings us to the end of a fabulous conversation on a very fabulous book, Betrayed by Hope. And we hope that members of the audience will go back and click on the Amazon links of the book. It's available, shippable, and immensely enjoyable. So thank you very much to the Department of French and to Mohar for this opportunity.
And thank you very much, Basudhara, for those wonderful questions. And thank you, Mohar, for bringing us online with your department and your audience.
Thank you so much. Really, it was really fortunate of us to be able to have both of you, and Basudhara, especially when I read her research paper after Malashri ma'am told me about it. It was so nicely written that I had to go back to the book which I had read, but I had forgotten about it. And then it was, I especially like the way you brought both your reflection on it and summarized the content of it, putting how art and creation can come together. So it was really wonderfully, organized. You can see Malashri ma'am as an academic here. She has well organized everything. And that's why I think, I'm sure the audience, because of this alternating between multimedia and your interaction, it made the audience, always on the tenterhooks that what's going to come next. Thank you so much. I invite questions from the audience before I go on about it. So please come and, whatever questions you have, you can ask them because we won't get this opportunity again. So anybody having any questions, please come on. Perhaps I should begin, maybe people are not coming ahead. So I just have the book here, and it is also available at the department. So for students who want to, have a read first and then perhaps purchase, it's there available at the department. I bought it for the department. I wanted to ask Malashri ma'am, when Madhusudan Dutt came back to Bengal and started writing, he was also asked to translate a few books, like Neel Darpan or something, which I remember, I'm not very sure of, but did he also do some translation of Bengali works into English?
He did. He was, in fact, that's how he managed to get a little money and recognition. And his first assignment actually was translating a play, which was in Bangla, which it's colonial times. So anybody who wanted to grab the attention of the current government and the people who mattered, the material had to be translated into English. So who better than Michael Madhusudan Dutt, who had come back to Kolkata and was looking for something to do and was proficient in both, to be given the task of translating from Bangla to English.
Thank you so much. Anybody else, please have a question? Go ahead.
Hello, am I audible? Hello, ma'am. Am I audible to you?
Yes, you're very much audible. Yes.
Thank you for the confirmation. Thank you, ma'am, for such a brilliant presentation and such a wonderful work that's surely going to entice, I think, all the students and scholars and bring them again back to Michael Madhusudan Dutt. While I was hearing this presentation, ma'am, I just had one curiosity that kept on coming back to me, and that was to what extent Michael Madhusudan Dutt's works like Ekenki, Buro Shaliker Gharer Ro, or say Ekenki Bole Shobhota, these kind of plays, to what extent did it influence your work, both in terms of style and content? So that was the curiosity that I had in mind while listening to your presentation. Could you just let us know about to what extent such plays, in terms of its style and content, influence or inspire y'all while y'all were engaged in doing such a wonderful work?
I'm so glad you've brought up the reference to these two plays. They are satires, they're social satires. They were very popular. And this is also an illustration and expansion of what Basudhara and I was saying about the range and scope of Michael Madhusudan Dutt's work, which has not been explored enough. Now, the thrust of our book being more the biographical and the feminist, we didn't talk about these two particular plays in any great detail. But this is another track for one of you to pick up for a research paper or more as to the social satire that Michael Madhusudan Dutt took up.
Yes, and especially when this, in these two plays, especially, we see the women protagonists being given the voice of the critique of the dense colonial society. So there again, you go that there is a conflict in what the avant-garde were doing at that time in the Dedan colonial society, and the women getting the voice to critique the same. So, well, that actually, led to this curiosity because, to some extent, he was giving not the men of his, the men protagonists, rather the women group protagonists, the voice to critique the society. So, well, I was interested in knowing whether you've, thought of this in while you were doing the content or the style of writing this particular play.
You see, when you're writing a play, you have to be very conscious of the play time. This one is about an hour, 15 minutes, and only two actors, so you can't pull it too long.
Okay.
Therefore, we had to make choices. But yes, we did consider it. But again, we have to be making certain kind of selections as you go along, so that it's a tightly knit script. So there is the possibility of another play, which talks with focus on the social satire from the excellent point of view that you've just made.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks to Swati Chatterjee. She's actually a trained historian and she teaches French from a long while, one of the senior teachers at Alliance Française du Bengal. We didn't get to see you. Perhaps it would have been nice if you switched on your video.
Yes, I am there. Yes, just after my classes. So yes, there am I. And so thank you, Mom. Thank you, Mom.
Thank you. Yes. And we have another question from Sharmili Jaipal. She says, it's been a very illuminating session. I wanted to know about the poet's mastery on other European languages, especially French. So Sharmili Jaipal, if I'm not mistaken, is teaches at the University of Pondicherry. Is that right? Yes, I think so.
Michael was entirely conversant with French, and the story of his life partner, Henrietta, we have no evidence that he actually married Henrietta. And there's no evidence that he actually divorced his first wife, but she was his life partner. She's said to be partially French. There is discussion and debate about it, but they were both, and their children too, were fluent in French. And he was deeply influenced by French writers. And many of the letters speak about this deep connection that he felt with French literature and French society. Also with Italian. On Dante's, one of the centenary celebrations, he actually wrote a sonnet on Dante and sent it across to the king. So he was very conversant. He spent his time learning languages all the time. There's one letter where he gives you a timetable of the 6 languages that he's working on every single day simultaneously.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you. I think that answers the question. Anybody else, if you have a question, please come ahead. Okay, ma'am, then I would like to ask one question, and that is, because he really grew up in a family which was so opulent, and being the only son of the family, we all read about, him in Shei Shamoy, that's like Sunil Gangopadhyay's book, and other literature written around that time, that how spoiled he was, because there used to be a plethora of dishes in front of him, and his friends used to visit his house from the Hindu college, and they could choose anything they wanted to eat. So does he write any letter, because I have not read his letters, does he write any letters about his past, and that the nostalgia, or the very fact that so much of opulence and he had just wasted it for nothing? Do we find any regret in his letters?
He certainly writes about his college friends. In fact, the most consistent line of letters is to Gaur Boshak, who was his dear friend from Hindu college times. And the early letters that we have quoted, we have to make a selection. The letters are profuse. So we picked up the ones which led to this track of postcolonialism and feminism. He talks about going on a barge with his friends, having a picnic. He talks about fabulous meals. He talks about having great times with his friends. So these are no doubt letters of the kind of affluent background that you're talking about. And yes, Sunil Gangopadhyay has a lot to say on that matter. But remember, Sunilda is also creating fiction. And so are we. The prize that we got for this book was for fiction, and rightly so, because the letters is all we have. And you know that in the letters, we don't know how much he's posturing. And some of the letters actually show the posturing, that we know from other sources that he's in a state of penury while he's in France, but he's writing to Gaur Boshak to say, oh, everything is fine, this is the best place to live in. We are doing very well, the education is brilliant. So he's also posturing in those letters. So how much is fact and how much is fiction, we don't know. But yes, it was an affluent home and he was an only child. He was very close to his mother. After he was disinherited, there is reasonable evidence that his father married a second time, possibly even a third time, in the hope of getting a Hindu male heir.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's very illuminating. So if we have no more questions, I'll wait for one more minute, and then perhaps we will have a vote of thanks for the session, because it's already late also, and I'm sure Malashri ma'am has a lot of work, and Basudhara also has just come back from college and sat for the session. So anybody wants to ask anything?
Let me ask Mohar, what makes Michael Madhusudan Dutt an attractive character for you?
Actually, I have always felt whenever I read him that it was a very tragic and elusive world in which he was living, and in which many of us we do live when we are children and we read English literature, everywhere that he's dreaming of the England that he is in. So when we grow up in India in a convent school and we are fed on those, we dream of that. But he's actually recognized for his contribution to Bengali literature only after, at the fag end of his career when he really starts writing. So I have not really read much of him in thoroughly, but I have read snippets of him and heard stories as you do here when you are growing up in Bengal. So we can all associate with him. He's a figure who has who could be any of us, and I think that sympathy is what we draw upon when we read him. And he's such a genius in his Bengali poems, and that he just recognized it through others when others started appreciating him at the end of his life. That is what has stayed back with me till very recently, until I started reading your book and I saw the different perspectives from your letters and all that.
I think that's a very important point. And to bring Michael Madhusudan Dutt into our current context, isn't the multiculturalism and the multilingualism that we are now talking about and practicing so easily in our lifetime? He had to make a choice between one language and another. But today, when we look at him, we should appreciate simultaneously his productivity in the world of English literature and its inheritance, and how he transferred that inheritance to purposeful use into Bangla.
That's very true. Thank you so much, really. And from your book, we also feel that he was such a courageous person, actually, and also from his biography that it was not easy for him to give up everything and go into Bishop's College when he was such a cherished child, and give up everything, be invisible, just because he believed in something. So that is immensely inspiring. Thank you, Malashri ma'am. Actually, not that you have discovered and made us rediscover him through your book. I think that will be a legacy for ages to come.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Basudhara, because if you were not present, and if you had not been in interaction with Malashri ma'am, we would have missed out many of the points. I'm very grateful for the immense effort that you've put in all preparing the PowerPoint and this conversation.
It was sheer joy
Not
working
easy.
with Malashri ma'am, and I learned such a lot. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to engage with Malashri ma'am and the text and with your department. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I really hope that it doesn't remain confined to to India, but that this book gets recognized abroad, because it will also make them familiar with the contributions of a person like Michael Madhusudan Dutt. Thank you so much. And on this note, may we end the session. And Malashri ma'am, if you can quote something which you really like from him, we'll be very grateful for that.
Let me quote just one line from Michael Madhusudan Dutt, which picks up the self-confidence, hope, and innovation that both Mohar and Basudhara were talking about. This is from his letter. Michael Madhusudan Dutt. You may take my word for it. I shall come out like a tremendous comet and no mistake. So that's the Michael Madhusudan Dutt we should take away from this session.
Thank you. And if the participants, you could just switch on your, we can take a photograph. If you can switch on, if you want to just, if you don't mind switching on your videos, I'll be really grateful, because it will be a memory for us. I don't know when we will meet again with Malashri ma'am and Basudhara and all. So thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you a lot. So I also hope that we will go ahead with this, and Basudhara and I will try our best to put this into writing and into publication, so that it at the same time serves to explain the book but it also serves for future generation of students who want to do further research into the subject, into your writing and work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a very good plan.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, good night then.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
ma'am.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.